Are you tired of the political noise?
Not the American.
I'm sick.
It's time to tune out the noise and tune in to Rational Radio.
It's all about chemistry, and it's all about the goals, and it's all about what you want to try and accomplish.
In a conversation about how we solve problems and how we deal with the issues that Americans want people to deal with.
Michael's going to go after people who are on his side. I'm going to go after people who are on my side.
We're serious people, and we have fun, but at the end of the day, we get stuff done.
We want to hear your opinion. We want to hear your thoughts, but mostly we want to hear your solutions.
And that's what it's about.
What we do is what I like to call Rational Radio.
Michael Steele is a Republican. Rick Ungar is a Democrat. And this is Steele and Ungar.
Welcome to Steele and Ungar Rational Radio on Sirius XM's POTUS Channel 124. I am former Congressman David Jolly.
And I'm former Congressman Patrick Murphy.
And we are filling in today for Michael Steele and Rick Ungar. They are out. Patrick Murphy and I had the opportunity to serve in the United States Congress together, myself a Republican, Patrick a Democrat, very much worked together on bipartisan issues, and since leaving office have tried to do the same. It is a pleasure for us to fill in this evening for both Michael and Rick. We look forward to 2 hours with you talking about, frankly, some issues and topics of bipartisanship that Patrick and I experienced in Congress, challenges to bipartisanship, very importantly, but obviously also the very important news of the day, the continuing crisis at the border, the separation of families and children, events at the White House and on Capitol Hill. We're also going to touch a little bit in the next couple of hours on some prognosticating for November. Is it really a blue wave that we are looking at, or will the Republicans be able to hold off on electoral defeat come November? We're going to be joined at different points in the hour by Congressman Ruben Gallego to talk about the crisis at the border. He represents a congressional district in Arizona. We will also be joined by an elections forecaster and prognosticator in the second hour when we talk about November. We also do want to touch on an issue that unfortunately and sadly just will not go away in the United States today, and that's the issue of gun violence, particularly among youth and in our schools. But as I mentioned, this is Congressman David Jolly, a former Republican member of Congress, joined with Patrick Murphy, a former Democratic congressman from Florida. He and I had very similar experiences. Patrick was a Democrat elected in a Republican-leaning district. I was a Republican elected in a Democratic-leaning district. That is unusual in today's hyper-partisan environment. Patrick, tell us a little bit about your entry into politics and being a Democrat that defeated the Republican Tea Party champion, Alan West.
Well, first of all, thank you for that introduction, and I look forward to hearing from everybody today. I ran for office, quite frankly, because I was so tired of the gridlock that I thought was at the worst in our country's history in 2010, 11, and 12. But looking back, that's pale in comparison to what we're seeing now. And I was tired of pointing a finger, and I decided to run because I wanted to get things done. And one of the very first things that happened when I got to Congress was I realized that the two parties want that control. They want that partisanship, and they divide us right off the bat.
So, Patrick, you actually were a former Republican who then became a Democrat and ran against a Republican, right?
I was.
And I bet your Democratic colleagues like to remind you of that occasionally.
It sure comes up in primaries.
So walk us into that a little bit, though. I mean, you mentioned the primary. I think both parties are having a hard family conversation right now about both ideology and tone and tenor. We see the hard Republican family conversation on display every day, right, as it has become the party of Trump, as we have moved from the language, at least, that Reagan used about better angels, and Bush 41 talked about 1,000 points of light. Bush 43 talked about being a compassionate conservative. Donald Trump came in with this populist, nationalist platform and talked about American carnage. He has embraced elements of the party that perhaps past presidents, Republican presidents, have rejected, but he won. He won. And he has created a new tone within the party, has created new policies, but also a real divide within the Republican Party. And I am somebody very much involved in that divide and disagree strongly with our president. The Democrats' family conversation really hasn't been under the spotlight, at least yet. But Democrats are having a similar one. Would you agree?
No, absolutely. And I've been saying this for several years now. Being in the Democratic caucus, listening to the debates that were happening, we were lucky in a sense that we had a leader in the White House that more or less could keep the views of the far left and the sort of moderates together in line and move something forward. But our real family conversation is going to kick off right after these midterm elections when we have 15, 20 plus Democrats running for president. And you're going to see a wide, sort of variation there in views and strategies on how we, not only what policies, but how do you beat President Trump?
Is there a message Democrats are going to gather around? Is there a common thread between, say, the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party and maybe the Joe Biden wing of the party? What messages do you think we will see going into November or even going into 2020 from the Democrats?
I've been disappointed thus far that there hasn't been a strong message, and I think Democrats will get so far. They'll get a certain point with being the anti-Trump party, right? That is natural in any midterm election. Historically, that's true. However, in order to really get some gains, in order to get back to the White House, you can't rely on that. Democrats will need a strong message. I haven't seen that emerge yet. Personally, I think it needs to be based around the economy. It can't just be, some of the sort of ancillary issues we see discussed. It's got to be a macro issue because people at the end of the day are going to vote with their pocketbooks.
Which is a little bit what Donald Trump spoke to, right? I mean, listen, I had a very unconventional path through Congress as a Republican who spoke out about campaign finance reform, tried to solve compromise on gun reform. I was willing to talk about marriage equality and climate change and so forth. Not really to co-opt or frankly adopt a progressive platform from the Democrats, but because I thought as a representative we should on each side of the aisle be talking about all of these issues. The reality is I believed I was talking about common sense. Donald Trump believed the same thing, right? I mean, set aside his tone and his rhetoric and frankly the offensiveness, in my opinion at least, of his comments and some of the things he has said and done. But he spoke to people's economic anxiety. He spoke to their anger, people that were mad at Washington, that thought they had been left behind, and he beat the field at that.
Absolutely.
And I think Democrats are going to have to figure out, how do they speak to that same audience? How do you get back to winning the Rust Belt?
Right. And David, when you were elected and got to Congress, people respected you for being bold and having those views. And President Trump is the ultimate P.T. Barnum here, right? I mean, he's been on both sides of every issue for decades now. He is continuing to do that and play both sides of these issues. But when you look at that sort of frustration, I think it's deeper than what a lot of people are getting credit for, that there's so much anger in the world. It's not just here in America, right? We are seeing these polls to the hard right just recently in Colombia. We saw Brexit. We've seen, Austria and Hungary and the Philippines with Duterte. These sort of strongmen are being elected all over the world. So we need to, I think, ask ourselves as a country, but certainly as a Democratic Party, to dig a little bit deeper and think about where is that frustration coming from. President Trump has certainly, hit on some very high-level things that are the sort of easy things that I of course, do not agree with the tariffs, with immigration, with trade policies. But people have this sort of nostalgia. And when you think back 30, 40 years ago, I don't think the American public in general was as partisan as it is today. I think people were just more, sort of capable of getting along and had more of a moderate views generally. But something has happened in the last several decades, and especially the last 10 years, to rip this country apart and pull us to our corners.
No, that's true. Look, there's data actually behind that. Some fascinating studies just in the last year where international polling groups study year-over-year trends. We have seen a significant drop in the trust of government, regardless of party. But on the bipartisan thing, it's fascinating. In the last 50 years, we have seen approval or acceptance of interracial marriage jump by 40 to 50 points, right? That's commonplace now. We've seen the support of marriage equality, same-sex marriage, that has also trended up 20 or 30 points in the last 50 years. But if you talk about bipartisan marriages, a Republican marrying a Democrat, that number's actually gone down by 10 or 15 points in the last 15 years. No, we're in real trouble. We are on this roadshow and we talk about a lot of fixes. You and I had similar experiences, the challenges to bipartisanship. And one of the things we talk about, which I think is very important and gets overlooked, is there is a strong difference between principles of bipartisanship and suggesting everybody has to be a moderate. And one of the things I've enjoyed on the tour you and I have been doing is the ability to suggest, look, we're not asking people to be moderates. The whole idea of the Steele and Ungar show and rational radio is not to suggest that the answer is always right in the middle, but it's to suggest that at least wherever you are on the spectrum, if you are in the middle or if you're on the right or on the left, the principles of bipartisanship suggest that our nation is stronger when we work together. What we ran into, though, in Congress, and you speak very well to this, you joke that you have more points than I do on this because you're a Democrat, but challenges to bipartisanship. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, as a Democrat, unfortunately, I have 7 or 8 reasons to point to. I can't condense my list.
Come on, keep it simple.
Democrats have a problem messaging sometimes. Look back at Secretary Clinton's list of how to solve the country's problems, right? It was like 300 pages. Trump had it down to a hat.
So tell about it. We had similar experiences.
Yeah, I'll rattle a few off. So, before I got elected, I always thought money was the single biggest problem. You can still make a strong argument for that. And the lid completely blew off after Citizens United in 2010. Billions of dollars being spent in elections on both sides of the aisle. Number 2, though, and I would argue perhaps the single biggest issue, is gerrymandering in our country, where 90% of congressional districts are predetermined. And in those seats, you've got about 15% of that population voting. Therefore, you have 15% of the country determining 90% of your members of Congress.
15% vote in a primary.
Which
essentially is the only race that matters if you're in a gerrymandered district, right?
Exactly. So
that was not your district, though. I mean, you had a 50-50 district pretty much like I did, right?
Right. I was just blessed in a sense that we could be ourselves, right, David? I mean, we could be and represent the people, that were there, but also do what we thought was best. I mean, I took a lot of heat for voting with Republicans in many cases, voting against President Obama, as you did, voting against your party. But that's what is supposed to happen.
Sure. Look, hey, when I started out, I was polling at 1.5%, and the margin of error was 4. So I'm
came a long way.
I came a long way. I'm grateful for the honor I was given. But to your point, it influences decision making, right? If you're in a 50-50 district where you have to give voice to a more diverse constituency, where you really have to compete for every vote regardless of party, that is a different decision-making model for a member of Congress than if you represent a district that favors your party by 20 or 30 points.
Absolutely, and we see it every day. We see it playing out, just this week with immigration. There are Republican members of Congress that are uncomfortable with this White House's policies and what's happening on the border. They truly care. However, they know who's going to vote for them, and they know who that 15% are in their district that will vote in the primary, and they will continue to pander to that group.
And look, I often say it's not just members of Congress that want to keep their job, right? We all go to work each day hoping we can keep our job. And so in this case, they are just responding to the incentives that have been deliberately constructed by the parties in power to protect incumbency. But it is driving their behavior. We're going to talk more about this in the second hour when we're talking about the 2018 November elections. But real quickly, hit just the points of some of the other topics, and then we'll revisit them in the second hour.
And they're all connected, right? Because the next one on my list is the media, and media is becoming more and more partisan, whether that's the Foxes versus the MSNBCs and CNNs, or whether that's social media, where people are going to get their news from a feed, whether that's Facebook or whether that's a website they go to. Either way, it is becoming more rigid, and people are becoming hardened in their beliefs, making it harder to actually find that middle ground because you only see one side of a story.
And what about the money?
Money is a big one. People are going to continue to pander to where they can get that money from. The big check writers, the unions, the billionaires, the Koch brothers, whatever that might be. And then that's connected to the media. You go say something crazy on Fox or MSNBC, you're going to raise a lot of money online.
My answer is take political commercials off of television. I think if we do that, you take the need for the money out, right? It's a supply and demand issue. We're going to have a good time talking about all of this, specifically this topic a little bit more in the second hour. But up next, we are going to be talking about the continuing crisis at the border, the family separation crisis that we are seeing. You can call in with your opinion anytime, 866-967-6887. That's 866-96-POTUS. Again, coming up, we're going to be talking about the crisis at the border. We'll be joined a little later also by Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego to give us some insights on what's happening in Capitol Hill and down Pennsylvania Avenue at the White House. We'll continue after this. I am former Congressman David Jolly.
And the good news is all of these problems are solvable. We can do this. I am former Congressman Patrick Murphy, and we're filling in on Steele and Ungar, Sirius XM POTUS 124.
All points of view welcome. All points of view explored. But no political posturing. This is Steele and Ungar on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
When was the last time you replaced your toothbrush? Do you always brush twice a day for a full 2 minutes? Paying attention to these good habits has a huge impact on your health. Introducing Quip, spelled Q-U-I-P, the new electric toothbrush that helps to fix the brushing habits that most people get wrong. Quip does this with a lightweight and sleek design, simple timed vibrations, and guiding pulses to give you a perfect 2-minute clean. Bulkier electric brushes have awkward charging stations, modes you don't need, and cost 5 times as much. Quip starts at just $25, and you can get brush head refills automatically delivered on a dentist-recommended 3-month schedule for only $5, and shipping's free. Quip has been featured in GQ, Oprah's O-List, and Time magazine named it one of the best inventions of the year. Go to getquip.com/steele right now and get your first refill pack free with a Quip electric toothbrush. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/steele, spelled GETQUIP.com/steele.